Welcome back. We've been discussing the virtues, and today we have with us a very special guest, Kasey Kaimann. She's a petite, soft-spoken young woman, and it's after interacting with her that I realized that looks can be extremely deceptive because while she comes across as very demure, I think it's quite appropriate to consider her as a woman with an iron will. So you'll realize why as we progress along. But welcome to the show, Kasey.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here.
So Kasey, so I wanted you to share with the audience a little bit about where you're from, your family background, what kind of an upbringing did you have?
Yeah, so I'm from a small farm town called Old Monroe, Missouri, which is about 45 minutes north of St. Louis, Missouri, in the United States. And my background, yes, really small town, little farm town. I'm actually on my one side, I'm the oldest cousin of 20 total. So, and we all live within about like 3 miles of each other because we all live on the farmland. So really grew up in a really tight-knit family, grew up Catholic, grew up in a very loving household who really valued family time and just really loving each other well. We grew up praying with each other and going to church on Sundays. And so that's kind of a little bit of my background and my family.
So you mentioned that you grew up on a farm. So I'm a bit intrigued because I pretty much grew up in a city my entire life. So if you can share with us, life on the farm, what kind of a kid were you growing up? What were your teenage years like? Because I presume that you lived with your parents up until school. So if you can just share with the audience how that was like.
Yeah, so it's actually my dad and his brothers that run the farm mostly. And so our whole family kind of pitches in, just kind of are going on the river, really just exploring nature kind of thing, having animals, raising pigs, things like that. As a kid, I was on the shy side. I was really quiet. I was kind of afraid of strangers in a way. Went to a Catholic grade school. And yeah, I was just kind of like that quiet, nice kid that was nice to everyone, but just kind of quiet. And then in my teen years, I went to a public high school, and that was kind of a culture shock for me going from a Catholic grade school to a public high school. But I started to sense that people started to like me, and I started to hook on to that affection or that attention. And I started to immediately get a desire for like popularity, for more friendships, hanging out with the popular people in school, really growing those friendships. I played like all the sports in high school, really got out of my bubble, really was not that shy girl anymore. Don't really know how that happened, just kind of flipped a switch and started becoming more outgoing all of a sudden. High school really brought that out of me. But with that, it came really just doing everything I can to become popular, to become the most prettiest, to become the most liked, really all of that. Like I said, I played like every sport. I started going to every party, started to date boys. I started to get into that lifestyle of pleasure and what is that immediate gratification. And so that's kind of like how my teenage years started to go, starting on to parties, getting drunk on the weekends, hanging out with the wrong crowds who did not encourage virtue in my life. I was even, now with all of this, it paid off. I got homecoming queen, which is a goal of mine. Like I got all the goals per se. I really tried to live that high school lifestyle out. But it ultimately was unfulfilling. But that's kind of how my childhood and into my teenage years started to go.
So when we, sort of had a conversation earlier, you mentioned to me about that turning point in your life where, you sort of went through that 180-degree turn and life just changed from what it was up until then. So if you can share what really happened and how it changed your perspective towards life itself.
Yeah. So my junior year of high school, God really made aware to me that he was really real. And for the first time, I grew up in a faithful household. But I kind of always viewed it as, okay, this is what you have to do in order to get to heaven. Go to church, pray, whatever. But I don't know if I fully believed with all my heart that God was real. And in my junior year of high school, the Lord really just showed himself to me to the point where I knew without a doubt that he was real. And I knew that I had to change my life. I knew I had to. It was such a big encounter that I knew I had to give up everything for him, that I was not living the life that he was wanting for me. And I started to realize that just based of the emptiness that I was feeling with every sin that I committed. Before this encounter with God, I just kind of sought that pleasure life, that immediate gratification life. But even then, when I lived that life, I knew that something was missing, that it wasn't fulfilling me, that it was like happiness at 1 second and then it was completely gone after that. And I wasn't really sure what God could give me. But once he made aware to me that he was like actually like really real, I was like, okay, I'm done with this life. I need to give up all of the sin that I've been doing. And so this was such a big turning point for me that I really flipped my life around. I knew that this relationship with him was worth it. And so I really pursued him with all that I had.
So you mentioned that once you sort of had this turnaround, that you figured that that life that you'd led thus far was sort of empty, and it required a complete turnaround, even in terms of your giving up certain things. So how easy or difficult was that for you? I'm just coming from the perspective of when you shared with me about certain habits that you had, for example, on the farm, certain traditions that you had and followed. Like for instance, you mentioned that drinking was completely normal, and so if you can just share with the viewers how you sort of went through that process of giving up something which you liked, and how easy or difficult was that?
I'm sure this is common in a lot of rural areas of just after a hard day at work, you just have a beer with your family and it's really normal. And so that's kind of the environment that I grew up in. It was very casual. But in high school, of course, I took it over that casual drinking, right? I got drunk. I got into that party lifestyle. And I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed having a beer with my family or things like that. And so, but I knew that it was such a temptation for me that if I had a little bit, I almost had that mindset of like, well, what's the point of drinking if you're not going to get drunk? Like I had switched to that enjoyment, to that extreme kind of thing. And I didn't know how to go back to that enjoyment level of alcohol. And so after this encounter with the Lord and wanting to give up this sinful lifestyle, I made the decision I just need to give up all alcohol completely, because I don't have that self-control to only have a little bit to the point of just enjoyment. And so I gave up alcohol completely, and it was right after senior year and all these grad parties are happening. And I was like, dang it, why am I doing this now? Like, I have all these opportunities to have fun and drink with my friends. And this is the time that I decided to not drink alcohol. And so this was actually really challenging for me, because I knew how much fun it was, and that excitement and just that joy with friends drinking and stuff. But I knew ultimately, like, this wasn't going to fulfill me and that it wasn't worth it because of that emptiness that I felt after the day after. And over time, I think self-control built up, and I started to realize that my desires started slowly fading away for these kinds of things.
So, you live in a culture which is, I mean, I guess all of us live in a world or culture that's extremely hedonistic, that, where pleasure reigns supreme. So, can you just share with the audience, you've alluded to the fact that you gave up several things that you liked, which you knew weren't good for you, but which provided you with immediate gratification. So how do you sort of live this life of virtue on a day-to-day basis where you literally have to swim against the tide? So if you can share with the audience, because I'm sure there are a lot of people out there who are thinking to themselves, gosh, this girl's really young, and how does she live this kind of a lifestyle on a day-to-day basis? So if you can just share that.
It's hard. It's definitely hard, especially being on a college campus when temptation is everywhere for a lot of different things, really. But I think the number one thing that helps me is daily prayer, because I think that God gives me the grace to overcome these temptations, but also knowing the reason why I'm doing something helps. So I come from a marketing background, and we always talk about, like, if you get your customers to know the reason why they need this product, then they're in. And I think that's really true for me. If I know my why, then that gives me an immense strength and ability to do what I'm doing, because I know the purpose and the reason behind it. And so I think that daily prayer and that constant reminding myself who I'm doing it for, why I'm doing this, that it's worth it, and that giving into all of these is not going to fulfill me, but this life is going to fulfill me. Knowing that reason why helps greatly. Other thing is that I think is super underestimated is surrounding yourself with good, virtuous friendships. It's very easy. When I look back in my high school years, I had a lot of friends that didn't lead me to virtue, but led me into a lot of sin. And who you hang out with really makes a difference on who you become and what you do. And so when you surround yourself with good, virtuous friends who are inspiring you to grow in virtue, who love you for, who teach you to love well, it really makes a difference. And so I think that is one of the most important things for me that has really helped me, is finding virtuous friends and growing those friendships. Because when you're in that community who's building each other up and lifting each other up to this virtuous life, it's so much easier to do things with people than alone and trying to fight it alone, because it's almost impossible to try to swim against this current alone. And then another thing is, when you are in the situation of temptation, it's almost impossible to defeat it. It is so hard. And so for me, I know that I can't even put myself in that situation of temptation, because I know that as a human, our flesh is weak and we give into things so easily because we are just so weak. And so for me, not even putting myself in a situation of temptation. For example, like whenever after my senior year of high school, I knew that if I went to those parties, I would not be able to do it. I would be too weak. And so I just didn't go at all, because I knew it would be a huge situation of temptation. And so knowing the end result and knowing like, I will probably give into this right now. If I go to this place, if I do this thing, knowing that end result and what I probably will do, I just make that easier decision from the very beginning. Okay, I'm just not going to go. That's a much easier decision to make than when you're already in the situation. You're like, oh, like I want to do this, but what should I do, kind of thing. So prayer, daily prayer, surrounding yourself with virtuous friends, and then not putting yourself in the situations of temptation, I have found to be the three biggest things that have helped me to swim against the current, and not only just to avoid these things, but also to live this amazing, joyful life that has given me so much fulfillment and practicing these virtues. And the more you grow in these virtues, the easier it is to live out these virtues in your life. And then you see the joy and the peace that you get from this. And that only encourages you to grow more in these virtues. So that's what I would say to that.
So, which leads me to my next question, which is, uh, you said that you don't put yourself in those situations so that you don't have to sort of be torn from within in terms of, oh gosh, I want to do this but it's difficult. So having said that, do you ever feel, because you've seen the other side, do you ever feel like at least at some points in your life, given the fact that you're so young, do you ever feel that, hey, I'm missing out on something?
It used to more right after my conversion. It used to a lot like, what am I missing out on? All my friends are at this one place and I'm not there. What am I missing out on? But over time, it has gotten a lot easier. I think what really helps is already have lived that kind of lifestyle and knowing that emptiness. If I didn't already live that lifestyle, I think I would actually have a big problem with that. If I just grew up as a little virtuous person and like thrived all the way through, I think I would constantly wonder, what am I missing out on? Should I is this really the life kind of thing? But I think coming from the background of already getting a taste of that life and knowing that it's not fulfilling, even though it looks like it is, and it's very tempting, I think that helps a lot with where I am now, because I can immediately go back to that feeling and those circumstances and think, nope, it's not worth it. I actually think more of like, I see a lot of my old friends and I think, gosh, they're missing out on so much who are still living that lifestyle because they don't see all of the fruit and the joy and the peace that comes from a virtuous lifestyle. And so I have almost completely changed even my outlook of thinking. Instead of thinking, what am I missing out on? Now I'm thinking, oh my gosh, like they're missing out. Like they don't know this immense joy and peace and love that comes from this that I have found in these virtues.
And now you're pursuing theology, your master's in theology at Ave Maria University in Florida. So if you can just share with the viewers, what helped you in discerning that this is the path that you should be taking and not something else which you had in terms of your growing up on a farm. I guess you would have had completely different ideas. So what helped you to arrive at this process of decision making, that this is where I'm headed, this is where I want to be, and even the specifics like, okay, this is a university that I want to be, so how do you sort of make those decisions?
Yeah, I knew that I wanted a job that I would love. And so I wanted to follow my passions. And so growing up, I loved the farm. I loved being out on the land. And so I had a passion for agriculture. And so that's what I thought I was pursuing. But after encountering God, he became my greatest passion. And I was like, all right, that's the pursuit. That's what I'm pursuing. That's what I want my whole life to revolve around. And I think I just had that deep, deep desire for him that I just wanted every aspect of my life to revolve around him. And I think it was just kind of a grace that in my heart, I just knew that I needed to pursue theology. But, thinking about it, is it practical? There's not a lot of money in it. There's some cons, but I knew that I think that the Lord really called me to this, and I knew that he would provide for me and help me every part of the way if he was really calling me to pursue theology. And so really just praying and trying to listen to God, listen to the desires of my heart. Is this really what I want? Talking to mentors, talking to people that really know me and people I can trust, and seeing what they think I should do. Another thing that I try to base decisions on is if I'm in a place of desolation versus consolation. Desolation is kind of when you're kind of in this depressive state. You just don't have a lot of life in you. You don't hear God very well. You're just kind of in this messy, blurry kind of state in life. But then consolation is when, you're very aware of God's presence. You're constantly hearing him speak to you. It's very things like that. And so I try not to make decisions when I'm in a state of desolation, because I know it's a lot of blurriness. It's a lot of emotions. I won't be making the right decision. And so I always try to wait until I'm in a state of consolation to make a decision, because I know I'm actually making a decision out of reason and virtue. like, for example, coming to Ave Maria, I was a missionary at a summer camp, met a random person, and she invited me to coach soccer here with her. And I was like, cool, scholarship lined up, everything just fell into place. And so I knew that because it was so easy, and I knew it would be good for me, and I knew that I would really enjoy it, then it was a super easy decision for me, because I knew, okay, the Lord is providing so much for this opportunity that I know that this is the path that he wants me to go. So that decision was super easy. But that's kind of how I make most decisions, is relying on mentors, daily prayer, trying to hear what God is speaking to me.
So I'm just intrigued, and I guess, also the viewers, when you say that I listen to God, so is it an audible voice that you're referring to? Because I mean, people will be like, okay, how do you really listen to God? Is it like a loud voice that, is speaking to me in my ear, or how does that work?
Yeah, no. But most of the time it's through, sometimes when you're sitting there in silence and you just have these random thoughts out of nowhere, and you're like, whoa, that came out of nowhere. I wonder if that was God giving me a thought or something. And so then I'll continue praying on that. God, like, is this what you want me to do? And then, like, that day, a random person will come up to me and say something about the exact thing that just popped in my head. And I'm like, whoa, that's weird. And then it'll happen again through like a book or a song or something of that exact same theme. And so, like, whatever that like first came up in my head, like at a random thought, like, will be confirmed throughout the day or even that week through different events, through people, through books, through songs, through movies, through really through a shirt that someone is wearing. Just things like that, where that's kind of how I hear God speak to me. A lot of it is through other people that God will just send to me to say something to me, and they don't even realize it, right? They just think they have something to share with me because they just want to share it with me. And little do they know that God is using them right there to make something known to me. So that's kind of how I mean when I say, like, God speaks to me. It's not like I'm sitting there, okay, God, got it. Like, but it's more of a having my eyes open and aware and constantly seeking him, and then receiving what he's trying to get me through to communicate to me through different avenues.
Right. So, Kasey, when we discussed, you'd mentioned that you were in a serious relationship, that you have a boyfriend. So, my question to you is, when the culture seems to be again screaming out loud that it's perfectly okay to have sex before marriage, it's perfectly normal, this is what everyone does, if you don't, in fact, you're considered a weirdo. So how do you sort of have those boundaries with your boyfriend, and manage to live that life of purity? You said, when you shared, you mentioned the fact that you were in a steady relationship for the last 5 years. So that's a fairly long time, and most people would think that, come on, this can't be possible, that, two young people are together and, they manage to stay pure. So how do you sort of do that again? Because it's so countercultural, right? So if you can share how you live that life of purity with a boyfriend.
Yeah, it's definitely hard with really almost everyone, it seems like, who doesn't really care to stay pure. Especially even like being a virgin or being chaste is almost made fun of nowadays. You're not cool at all if that's you. But there's a lot of different things that I've learned through time of how to best stay pure and chaste. Ultimately, praying a lot with my boyfriend helps a lot, because I think, God gives us the grace that when we pray for purity and to stay chaste, but also when we are setting our mind on higher things, on virtue, then it's a lot easier to not fall into those sins. And I think ultimately, like, our relationship is built on friendship first, and then we fell in love slowly. And so we truly want the good for the other. We truly love the other person. Even if we were to break up, we just want good and holiness for each other. And so we know that giving into pleasure or that sexual activity, it's not good for the other, and we are just using each other for that pleasure, and we know that. So let's say we're in a situation of temptation, and we're tempted. Obviously, sex is good and it's from God, but it's only within marriage that it should be done. And so even though the feelings and the emotions and it can all be there, we know the end result, and knowing the end result before we give into that helps say, okay, nope, we're pulling ourselves out of this situation and we are running from this. And I think also knowing the purpose for sex, like knowing that sex belongs in marriage and it's unitive and it's to bond and to procreate. And if we know that, and it's not just to use each other, it's not to get pleasure out of each other, but it's to give completely of yourself to the other person. And we're not married. We haven't made that commitment to each other. And so I can't give myself completely to him. I'm not open to life. I'm not ready to completely give myself to him. And so I have to reciprocate that with my body as well.
I guess my final question would be, we've been speaking about the fact that, you've grown from a state of impulsive decision making to, a very deliberate process of decision making, where you've, sort of pray about everything and you discern and then decide. So how were your parents along this journey? Did they approve of your choices which you made after this 180-degree turnaround? And how important was it for you to get their approval, every step of the way? Because as kids, typically we look for that sense of, my parents are okay with this, and so, I feel kind of comfortable. So was that important for you? And, how would you sort of describe that whole situation?
Yeah. So yeah, I think at first they were like, what is going on with our daughter? Like, she went from going to all these parties to now really just spending hours inside a church. But then once they started to see that I was getting a lot of joy and peace from this different lifestyle that I had, they started to become a lot more supportive. And when I told my parents that I wanted to do theology instead of business, they were like, oh no, like you went from, something with, a possibly good career that you could provide for yourself, and now you're going into a career that who knows what kind of job you'll end up with. And as parents, they care for me and they want good for me, and they don't want to have to worry about me. And so I understand. So at first they were a little hesitant on me trying to study theology, but so I think over time they have slowly started to support it more and more. And you're right. I think as kids, we want our parents' approval. We want our parents to be proud of us. And I definitely had that. I definitely wanted my parents to be like, yes, like we'll pay for your college, we'll, all of that. But, that wasn't them really. As I've continued to grow in virtue and as a person, they have continued, their relationships with God have also continued to grow, and their support has slowly grown throughout this time. So, yeah.
So, thank you so much, Kasey. I wanted to, I'm extremely grateful that you decided to do this. And I guess what I wanted to share with you was the fact that you're so young, just all of 23. And I guess I'm not as prudent as you, despite the fact that I'm much older than you. Hats off to you. I guess, what you've mentioned through this interview, the fact that what comes through is that you're very grounded as a person. And the reason why you're grounded is because you're very clear that every decision, big or small, you're going to rely on God for, the answers. And you're going to wait for His nod, whether it's through people, circumstances, events, books, whatever it may be, which explains why you are where you are in terms of the kind of person that you are. And I guess what really stands out and what stood out even earlier about you was the fact that you literally seem so countercultural, because what is so common to youth today is the fact that they're so rash in their decision making. They don't spend a minute before they take those big or small decisions, which lands them in so much trouble. And here you are, whether it's the tiniest of decisions, you wait on God to kind of direct your path. So I think that's like such a breath of fresh air. So I pray that you continue to be this shining star, and like swim against the tide. And so good luck with all your endeavors, and I sincerely wish you the best.
Thank you so much. It is a pleasure to be here and to have this conversation with you. So thank you.
Thank you, Kasey.